Chapter 7. 12th grade, Fall Term 2010 and Spring Term 2011. The Fall Term of 2010. Now I had 3 long-hour recesses a week, so now I could visit Östra 3 times a week. Most of the 94ers from Oldham had ended up at Dragon and most of the 94ers from Earsbuda had ended up at Östra. Most of the 94ers from Mariehamn were pretty much evenly divided between both schools plus Minerva located at the university campus, quite a bit away from downtown. Just like the last fall, I already knew most of the 94ers from Mariehamn and Oldham, but hardly any from Earsbuda until now. I also bumped into some 95ers from the same hood quite often in downtown. On September 21st, Alex Jones released the video titled, What We Really Are. This is clearly one of his very best videos, and it explains very much why I would remain so attached to him the coming years. Here he explained how people at large has been detached from their basic survival instincts, how people have become spoiled and weakened by material abundance, by lack of real challenges in life, and how the Illuminati has designed society that way through mainstream media, food poisoning and entertainment, in order to then carry out their politics and wars with minimal resistance. This has been increasingly proven through the years. This video explained perfectly what I tried to explain to people when I wanted to drop out of school, that quote, life was too easy. It also made great sense with my view on ASP and how it turns people into brain-dead zombies and who become dependent on these cult-like special classes, since they can't handle normal classes, and these parasitic teachers going on quote, power trips, and who think having ASP is cute. And even if about half the kids make it into normal high school classes, they hardly ever become better actually, as humans as a whole, looking at life as a whole. Sometime during this fall, I googled up, how to take responsibility. I can't remember why, but I do remember checking the first 3 to 5 sites I found. On all those sites I found mainly negative, pessimistic, condescending statements like, you are fully responsible for all your actions, everything's all your fault, you got nobody to blame but yourself, etc. Of course everyone's responsible for his or her actions, more or less. But you can't ignore external circumstances, especially not regarding youth. During the spring of 2009, I realized how my circumstances had affected me and my choices, good and bad. Therefore, I started quote, blaming my old mistakes from junior high on things like young age, ASP, grubby etc. But that didn't make me feel like a total victim. Rather the opposite, it actually helped me overcome all the guilt and all the self-pity that came along with that. I also became more grateful for all the good things that had happened to me and thus resulted in better choices. That's the main reason things went so good during 2009 and 10. And now this happens. I'm quote, told, that, everything's my fault, which was the total opposite of what I'd lived by for the last 18 months. I felt real insulted by that, like it was aimed against me. I took it real personal. Mostly I just got angry, since I knew full well I had never survived the worst had I not learned to blame circumstances. But at the same time, I was somewhat convinced that they were right, that everything actually was my fault. Consequently, I got a little depressed, but otherwise I just turned away from the crap and moved on like usual. Quote, I refuse to be concerned with condescending advice, cause I'm the only motherfucker that could change my life. End of quote, from Leaving the Past by Immortal Technique. But yet, I kept feeling a little depressed this fall. I blamed it instantly on not meeting same-aged people as often as before last summer, since most of the 91ers and everyone older had now graduated or dropped out for that matter. I visited the university a few times hoping I would bump into some guys there. There were plenty of minorities there, but I saw hardly anyone I knew. On the Tuesday of November 30th, I made a big mistake that would make the coming weeks real tumultuous. I contacted the head teacher on Facebook, shortly after having found his FB account, sending him a private message saying, all the blats know what you've done. I did the same last spring, in the form of a small note in his mailbox, shortly after putting up that website. I did this out of boredom and I wanted to push myself a little. The head teacher responded with, did what? Helping you make it into high school? I responded with, no, quite the opposite actually. Then I got no further response. On the Thursday of December 2nd, my parents had a discussion with me about all this. The head teacher had told them about the message I'd sent him plus the note I sent him the last spring. He demanded that we had a meeting about all this on the Wednesday of December 8th. On the Saturday of December 4th, I went out at night doing something I'd been doing this entire fall. I wrote down with the ASP class at Brentis/FSG on bus stops. I carved it on frosty windows with my thumb joint. This night I did it on the west side of downtown, quite close to Grubbe and Mariehamn. I'd also done it on the east side of downtown, Oldham and Earsbuda. On the Sunday of December 5th, shit hit the fan. My parents and the head teacher found out I'd written on bus stops on the west side. I and my parents got into a huge argument about this. The next day, shit hit the fan again. My parents and the head teacher found out I'd also written on bus stops in Mariehamn. Fortunately, they never found out about all the other bus stops. But then they also found out about a small article in Västerbotten's Folkblad, a local state-level newspaper, shortened to VF. I sent the article to VF on the previous Monday, November 29th. The article was named, "Mistreated in a Special Education Class," and was about just that. I also sent an identical article to Västerbotten's Kuriren, another local state-level newspaper, shortened to VK, on the same day. In this article, I never mentioned my name or hometown, but yet they knew it was me. After all this that had just happened, the head teacher decided to postpone the meeting to the Thursday of December 16th. Then on that very day, while being at school, I was told the head teacher had gotten sick, which resulted in another postponement. A few days later, the meeting was given a new date, the Tuesday of December 28th. I was also ordered to remove all the text I'd written on those bus stops. I decided to remove it on all bus stops, not only those I'd been caught writing on. Since long ago, I've realized that the solution is not shutting down the ASP class, or any other special class for that matter. I admit that I needed the ASP class in order to enter a normal high school class, now since I had ASP. That's the same reason I needed the special class back in elementary in order to have a more normal childhood and thus better chances than other kids with ASP. With that in retrospect, all elementary kids with ASP should go to special classes in elementary already, not strictly in junior high. But at the time, even now in 12th grade, I believed everything would have been better if I went to normal classes throughout both elementary and junior high. But the real reason I became so successful wasn't just that I entered a normal high school class. It was also because I, thanks to my early introduction to hip-hop, became the black sheep in the ASP class, which resulted in me, quote, hitting the streets. 6 to 8 out of all the 16 kids in the ASP class, me included, that I went with during my 4 years there entered normal high school classes, but only I and 3 others actually became normal and functioning as I see it. Everybody else remained typical ASPies, meaning nerdy and anti-social, whether they entered a normal high school class or not. Also, the ASP class tried to suck me into this retard cult really, and thus block me from the hip-hop hood black culture, or better yet just simply reality, which now saved me from the retard cult culture, Umeå's Latter-day Saints. Then on December 28th, we finally got to have our meeting with the head teacher. The meeting was held in the morning at Brentis, in a small room I'd never been in before. My old teacher from 6th grade was also present. It lasted for about an hour, and during the first half hour, we discussed mainly what I'd just done. I remember these statements from the head teacher, no particular order. 1. This is harassment, this is stalking, this is a crime. This sentence I remember clearly word for word. 2. I also think special classes are wrong. I'm trying to help kids with ASP go to normal classes without the need of help from a special class. 3. There is no ASP culture. What do you mean by, quote, typical ASPy? 4. The reason you're accusing me for being racist is simply because you've misunderstood everything. 5. As I see it, these conflicts with that guy and those 4 girls have been discussed already. But then during the second half hour, he started going a bit off topic. I remember these statements, no particular order. 1. It's weird that you hang mainly with blats, now when you're white middle class. 2. It doesn't matter what you do, you'll never become blat. 3. If it wasn't for hanging with blats, you wouldn't be sitting here. 4. All these blats will become, quote, white, when they grow up. Their blat behavior is just a temporary teenage phase. One of those girls' little sister will live in a row house in Rudding, right north of Grubbe, with a white husband. 5. It's kind of like Jackie Arklov becoming a Nazi. Of course you can't be a black Nazi. 6. As the blats graduate high school, and become white, they will leave the picture. You'll be surrounded by younger blats, while you keep getting older. 7. You gotta make your own path. You can't just follow a trend. 8. Blats are generally ignorant about ASP. 9. It's a big risk you might get beat up for being disabled and hanging with blats. That's the sad truth. As I see it, it's all the bullshit in the ASP class that made me turn to the hood and then try to expose the ASP class. Not the other way around like the head teacher said it. I did agree though that I had lost touch with people my age to some extent, but that was never because they became white. That was only because they graduated, or dropped out of, high school, one school year every summer. Then some even left town as the years went. I did lose some touch with people my age the coming years. But my real downfall actually came after I had become a Muslim and regained contact with old friends my age and some new ones. This is a completely different chapter, but in short, I got too drawn in by those who were truly whitewashed by Islam itself, at least according to their interpretation of the religion. It was never hip-hop/the hood itself or most minorities I came across. Islam did save me from the very beginning to some extent, but then despite me moving on to develop my faith on my own, outside of this quote, suburban bubble in the middle of the hood, I only kept deteriorating. I also knew plenty of guys born 1987 to 89 already, and they were just as hood as the younger ones. As of now, I know even more older guys, including even older ones, many of which are above 35 as of 2021. Many of them have kids now. On top of that, the same aged ones have gotten older, but not any whiter, simply because of that. I know about a few white blats, but most of them are actually younger than me, and they were already in about 2015. My accusations at the time that the head teacher was racist were, as I remember it, utterly lacking before this meeting. But during the meeting, my assumptions and accusations became much more confirmed. It's true that you gotta create your own path in life and not follow some trend. But the way I see it, I made my own path by following the hood blat trend, while going against the ASP trend. But then I have become much better at creating my own path during the later years, but that's because all these non-whites and rappers have followed as examples, as role models. The hood has also become somewhat more aware of ASP through the years thanks to me. They certainly have now. Plus, I'd never risk getting jumped by hanging with minorities just for being disabled. But then I did risk it by calling those girls the H-word and then walking through Oldham that night right after Krugen, which resulted in getting held at knife point. I also pointed out that I was far from the only white middle-class guy who hung with minorities, and I mentioned a few guys from Brentis as an example. Plus, it was never about just being of color, meaning switching skin colors. It was all along about building character and creating experience. That's the reason I hung with minorities. But the head teacher seemed to believe I was so retarded that I was only trying to switch colors, like that was all I was going for. The comparison to Jackie Arklove was also ridiculous. He could have thought of Jacob Holt that he himself introduced me to back in the day, or perhaps Olaf Palm. I sat silent for most of the meeting. I didn't want to make a mistake that could lead to a conviction. I remember at the end of the meeting saying, "It's getting a little off topic now." Then the head teacher told me to send a public apology to VF and VK, as well as publish an apology on Facebook. I told him I shouldn't do it on Facebook since that would only bring attention to something that hadn't gotten so much attention. But I did agree to send an apology to VF and VK since I'd still be anonymous. I also got to repeat after him almost like a witness in court, that I swear quote, on honor and conscience, to never speak anything about the ASP class or those girls ever again in speech or writing. Then we shook hands finishing the meeting. The meeting went real good. I managed to convince everyone I'd never do anything again, only to get away with what they knew I had done, while moving on with other things such as writing stuff on Facebook. I was real lucky. I felt a huge relief after the meeting while being real nervous right before it. I was also mad retarded for writing him on Facebook as well, sending him that note. No wonder I got busted. My parents and I have talked a lot about things since the winter of 2021 that I didn't want to discuss with them before, let alone this meeting. On April 8, 2021, my mother said in a private message that what could have happened if my teacher had called the cops on me at this time was that the social services would have gotten involved in the investigation. Such an investigation ends with the social services proposing a penalty. But my mother doesn't think what I did then was enough to get convicted. An investigation from the services could have also landed in a proposal for action from the services or the psychiatry, but that's only what she thinks. Nobody can know exactly this long after what would have happened had he made a police report. In any case, it probably wouldn't have been good for me. It's true that it would have been better for me in 2010 not to get the services sent on me. I was definitely not ready to put up that fight. But now it's 2021. Things have changed. Now I am ready. If I now committed any crime at all in 2010, it was definitely statute barred only 2 years later, December 2012. In Sweden, all crimes with a maximum penalty of 1 year in prison have a 2-year statute of limitation. The fall term of 2011. In early February, I started visiting Dragon every Monday, located a short bit south of Midgård. Since I had as much as 3 long hours every week, it was an easy choice. I could still visit Östra on Wednesdays and Fridays. The reason I chose Mondays for Dragon was that those girls had class during those hours. That made me not have to watch out for them. On top of all that, the reconstruction of Dragon was finished before the last fall, so now all the kids were there. Around the same period, I started suffering from a depression, much worse than the one I had the last fall. This depression would last a long time, changing me gradually, both for better and worse. I started shifting between depression and euphoria. I was depressed for like 3 days and then euphoric for like 3 days and so on. At first I felt like I literally couldn't do anything at all, demanding that everything would be, quote, perfect. I instantly realized something was wrong with me. I constantly tried to come up with causes and solutions while trying to keep my sanity intact. At first, I blamed literally everything, but then I went on to only blaming a few specific things. Those times when I became euphoric, I imagined myself the perfect life. I imagined myself growing up in the hood without any disability, but still in the same white middle-class family, since the east side of Umeå is mixed, but I still had to go to the ASP class due to a false diagnosis, plus that I got to enter Östra or Torun in 2007. I replayed real-life situations in these perfect circumstances. In retrospect, since long ago, my idea about the perfect life is totally different, and now I know it was never about address or school, and that the perfect life, as close as I would get to it as a Muslim, would turn out to be a bottomless hell, with this pre-marriage divorce at the forefront. Before the summer of 2010, I didn't matter as much that I still lived at home and went to high school. I would have done that even had I graduated that summer. The only problem, then, was I lived in the wrong side of town and went to the wrong school. Now I had a new problem, which was that I was a year too old, since I was supposed to have graduated already and possibly have my own apartment, in the hood or anywhere for that matter. The depression also made me dwell on past mistakes, especially from junior high, that I felt had added to my depression. When I left the nightclubs in May 2010, I started missing how it was, especially at Krugen during the fall of 2009. But now I started hanging at the nightclub Corona at the university campus, like 2-3 times a month, and then I got it all back a bit. Now I could also see events on Facebook for almost every weekend, which made it easy for me to decide whether I should go to Corona, or somewhere else, that Friday, Saturday or not, depending on how many minorities had, quote, attended the event. During this spring, I started running into some frasifjortisar, in plural, around town. Frasifjortis, in singular, is basically a reference to a troubled youth in upper elementary/junior high who hangs out at Frasses, a fast food chain that's extremely rare outside of northern Sweden. Yes, even in the south of Sweden it's something foreign. These days, it might as well be a question of just hanging out downtown, completely independent of any specific fast food chain. This wasn't one and the same crew, but 2 separate ones. One was some ethnic Swedes born around 94 to 96 from a few small towns around Umeå, who started saying hi to me. At first I did the same, but then I got tired of them. But instead of ignoring them, I started giving them the middle finger and stuff. It would get a little worse the coming years. Then there were also a number of younger kids, born around 97-98 with mixed ethnic backgrounds, and soon later during 2011 I'd learned that they lived in the eastern parts of Umeå. I have no bad memories of them really from 2011 and 12, but even this would get worse the coming years. All of these beefs would be out of this world as of 2014-15, except one. That one would come to impact my life until this day. Umeå got plenty of visits from Swedish rap acts during this spring and summer. Rap duo Ison and Fille performed at Youth Center Ham Magasinet, called Hamness, on the Saturday of April 30th. Then rapper Ken Ring performed at Vita Björn, White Bear, on the Wednesday of June 1st. Vita Björn is a boat that's attached to the ground along the Umeå River going through the city, right next to Hamnäs in downtown. I remember there being lots of fighting that night. Then Corona got a visit from rapper Doggy Doggelito during its last weekend in early June right before closing for the summer. Production team the Salazar brothers were also at Corona a number of times this winter and spring together with one rapper every time, Stur and Pato Poo to name a few. Doggy Doggelito and the Salazar brothers used to run the rap group The Latin Kings together between like 1993 to 2004, dropping 4 albums. Then they split. Then during the last weekend of March, Umeå Open, a yearly music festival, was held at Folkets Hus in downtown. I've never been at Umeå Open since there's never been any act of my taste performing there. But then on the Wednesday of March 30th, there was a mini-festival called Ersbuda Open held at Folkets Hus in Ersbuda, where that old library from 6th grade is located. There were strictly rap acts performing there. Plenty of minorities had also attended the event on Facebook, so I just had to be there. I remember local Umeå female rapper Cleo, Uppsala rap group Labyrinth and some same-aged Umeå natives I knew performing. This became a great night. The only problem was that I was like a zombie throughout the night. I was dead on the inside, not feeling anything at all. But I held on. I also started listening to plenty of Swedish hip-hop around this spring and summer with the help of Spotify, where I easily could listen through entire discographies. Until then, I'd listened mainly to American hip-hop on YouTube. At first I only listened through older Swedish rap acts such as Ison and Fille, Ken Ring, Petter, The Latin Kings and Timbuktu. Newer Swedish rap acts, plenty of which started showing up around 2010 already, was something I knew very little about at the time. I started listening through them in 2012. This Swedish hip-hop described my and my homies' reality as Swedish youth much better than American hip-hop. That would do a whole lot for me, really all of us, the coming years. I was deeply touched by Petter's latest album titled, The Savior in Need, in Swedish, which is obviously his best album together with his 1998 debut, My Sixth Sense. Here we had a white middle-aged man from middle and upper-class downtown Stockholm who really made music with substance, unlike all these black sellouts from the US. The song, Crofter, Powers, and its video reminded me strongly about 5th grade that I had just discovered, after having had no memory of it and its impact on my life since I started at Brentis, until now. The song was about his recently discovered ADHD diagnosis, which I had also discovered within myself. It immediately became a salvation, which it unfortunately didn't when I heard about Henry Rollins 2 years earlier. He made it at least okay, unharmful, for me to have ADHD or ASP, but not cool back then. And until now, I had believed that my hip-hop interest started with being snitch threatened by that guy, but I was dead wrong. Me being born in Södermalm, where Petter was born and raised, brought me closer to him also. On the Thursday of June 16th, Tupac's 40th birthday, I finally graduated high school. Op Berget got shut down on June 30th. It had been pretty much empty since the last summer mainly due to Facebook. A big part of me died, since Op Berget had been a big part of my life for the last 4 years. Around the same time, all the old pictures from all the youth centers got removed off the internet. I'd gone through them quite often for the last 3 years. It felt like pretty much my entire childhood was stolen from me during this summer. Then in about 2015, I realized it was only right that everything got removed. I myself have removed and thrown away a lot of things with time, and cut off people. Until 2015, I held on to these parts of the past too much, in its true sense, physically speaking. I was constantly trying to twist and turn everything to my advantage, and it worked quite well for a while I guess. But as time went on, I got tired and began to pay more attention to other things in life, past and present. Then being constantly reminded of past things in connection to public events and even more so personal stuff is something completely different. That ain't my fault. Before graduation, I came to the conclusion that the main reason I was depressed was that I'd had good contact with people my age until the fall of 2010, plus I took plenty of risks during 2009 and 10. All of that made me so strong that now when I only met younger guys, plus I was still stuck in Grubbe and Midgård, I got depressed. Then during the summer holidays, the depression got even worse. I came to the conclusion that I would never hang at Östra and Dragon anymore since I had finished high school. I also came to the conclusion that the older guys had disappeared and now even the younger ones since I'd finished high school. But most importantly, I was worried that I wouldn't get to move out of my parents' house soon, if ever. It became somewhat more obvious though why I was depressed, which helped a bit. In reality, I had good contact with people of all ages during this summer. I only got worried about the coming fall and winter, as well as the coming years. Now since I wouldn't have any school to hang it, I expected this fall and winter to become real empty, and it did also. Being depressed, I often hated myself. I often felt disgusting and lethargic. I often got stuck in the bed for like an hour after the alarm clock rang, awake but paralyzed. I was often suicidal, and I often wanted to start using drugs, all kinds of drugs including alcohol and pharma. I didn't exactly want to escape reality, I really just wanted to punish myself. I blamed my depression mainly on old mistakes, especially from junior high. I had now pretty much ended up there again, mentally speaking. But at the same time, I shifted between euphoria and depression like I had done since the last winter. When I was euphoric, everything was quote, perfect. I was satisfied with myself and my life. I could wake up out of the bed and look myself in the mirror. I was euphoric like this throughout the second half of 2010, so I still had some euphoria left over despite the depression. I became very much like a real drug addict, despite never touching a drug with my pinky finger. Starting from this summer until the next spring, I wrote lots of long texts which I uploaded as notes on Facebook. These texts were mainly about the depression and all its possible root causes. I usually wrote about my childhood and how it had caused the depression to begin with. I removed all of them both from Facebook and the computer during the winter and spring of 2015. They were very repetitive, like a big treadmill basically. In retrospect, I should have only removed them from Facebook. I often made a fool out of myself and some things are best kept private, but I think I would have liked to have them available today. I also started sitting at a bench about 30 to 60 minutes almost every weekend at night. The bench was located in downtown, right behind a block of pink buildings right below the train station. I called it the depression bench, and I sat there to quote, meditate, trying to break out of the depression and come up with causes and solutions. I also started taking long walks around the hood regularly, instead of just going back and forth on the bike like previous summers. I bumped into people even more often now, especially in Oldham. Almost every time I was there, I stopped by the soccer court. There were mainly younger guys, born 95 to 97, but sometimes even older ones. Oldham's soccer court became the best aspect of this summer. During this summer, I watched a recorded movie almost every morning. I remember seeing Once Upon a Time in America and 7 Pounds, among others. The main character in Pounds, played by Will Smith, I could relate to since he was drowning in his guilt like I was now. Then one morning during mid-August, while watching the British movie Fish Tank, my mother told me I was moving into an apartment on September 15th. I was real happy, despite still being depressed. But things did get better now when I no longer had to wait to get out of this house. The apartment was located in Lilliansberget, a small, newly built apartment complex right east of Berghem. It was somewhat closer to downtown and much closer to all the hoods than Grubbe. I got the apartment key on September 15th and then I moved in officially on the Tuesday of September 20th.